Now's a good time.
Okay. Yeah. So we've been in here for I've lost count, many days, and I'm not trying to be writerly or anything with the books in the back. It's just the more presentable part of the apartment right now.
Well, I had all these plans when I had this idea to do these interviews of like building sets behind me or like set dressing.
Yeah.
And then it took me like 2 days to even figure out how to get video to work. So,
I can relate so much to that.
but I think this works right here.
It's good.
Good. Thank you.
All right.
And so you've just been at home for,
I've been at home for over a week. I mean, it's been increasing the level of isolation. I had a bunch of travel plans, all got canceled, sadly. And Yeah, I've been at home working. This is actually my workspace, working in the mornings, and then with my wife and my 9-year-old in the afternoons. She just gave me a makeover the other day. So
I noticed that. That's
yeah,
excellent.
it's uncanny. I look out the window and Brooklyn is for the most part empty. I gotta say I enjoy the no cars
Right.
part of this. It's very loud here, and now it's positively bucolic. That's very nice. That's probably the only flip side to this whole situation.
Well, it's like frustrating for like, obviously there's a number of things that are frustrating, but it's like full blown spring right now here.
I know.
And I would love to just like, I'm sitting by the front door of the store and I would love to just have it open. And
Do you find that your customers and your readers are looking for books that are related to this whole situation, or is it more sort of like relaxed reading material that they're requesting?
I feel like there is a little bit of both. There's definitely like a lot of people ordering The Stand and Love in the Time of Cholera and books that are very like specific to pandemics and things like that. And then there's people that are like looking for stuff for their kids, and then people that are just like
Yeah.
getting whatever they're interested in. And so, yeah, I think there is a little bit of escapism. We put a bunch of puzzles and activity books and board games up in the front window for people. If they're walking by, they can choose from them. That's been the hard part, is like, we really like making suggestions to people, and it's difficult if they're not like face to face.
Yeah.
We can do it a little bit over the phone, but it's not.
No, I understand. Yeah. That must be tough.
Yeah. And you were talking, so I really wanted to talk a little bit about In the Distance, which
Sure.
is your debut novel, and you were a Pulitzer finalist for. And did you ever have any like hint that would be a finalist for anything like that, or?
Oh, no. I don't think, I obviously can't speak for anybody else, but who would, no, not at all. I was thrilled when it got published, when Coffee House took it on, and that in itself was just the apex of, it just exceeded all my expectations. I had written a novel before this one that nobody would publish. It got dozens of rejections from agents and publishers. Same thing with short stories and so on. So I was coming from a long string of rejections. I'm talking about years, not just a few months. So being published was incredible, and more so with Coffee House. I respect them so much. That was really it for me. The rest was just surreal and disorienting.
Yeah, coffee house, and there's like all of those really excellent. There's a lot of really excellent small presses, but they're one of the really good ones at like finding new talent and giving them a shot. And
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, and that I feel that that is all Chris Fishbach, who is the publisher of Coffee House, and really a visionary, and he has such great taste, and he stands by his choices and by his authors, and is quite fearless. You know, that's a nice thing.
yeah, it's the stuff they do. It's, I don't know the word for it, but I mean, they have like, there's a handful of like publishers, and if whatever they put out, like you can have a pretty good sense of if it's going to be of quality or not.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You know, growing up in Argentina as a, you know, in my early teens, there was this publisher, since, you know, since we're here, we can do these things, called Anagrama, and their books are they all look the same. They're very boring looking books, but, you know, you spot them immediately. And I would just read their stuff without knowing what was in these books, just because I trusted this publisher. And then, you know, I feel that New Directions then became the same thing for me. It's like, oh, here's a New Directions book with a cool cover by a person I've never heard of. And then, you know, that would be my next favorite author. And I feel, you know, Coffee House Press has the same effect for me, and I know for other people it's the same, and it's really only a handful of publishers who, because that is achieved over time, right? You have to have a really good track record to have readers just go in blindly for whatever it is you release, and you know, and Chris and Coffee House have been able to do that.
Yeah, and they're one of those publishers that I think really works well for independent bookstores.
Why is that?
They're like, when I think of your book, like I first kind of encountered it because I saw other booksellers talking about it, more so than, I don't really, as a buyer, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I don't really like pay attention to reviews and trade publications as much as I probably should. And so I'm not seeing like what's really getting advertised unless it's like a rep that's pushing it hard. And so that was a book that I discovered because of booksellers. And I feel like they've got a really good reputation with indie booksellers.
Yeah.
Who, a lot of them have really good tastes. And so it kind of like really like meshes really well.
Yeah.
I've sold your book really well.
Thank you.
Obviously because of the quality, but there's also really big about like wanting people just to discover things in the store. And so it's sat on my favorite shelf pretty much since it came out. And
oh, man, thanks. That means a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. But it's one of those things where like I put things on there that never move. That's one that like people kind of gravitate towards. And I'm curious, like, I think part of it's the cover. The cover is really like eye-catching. I think just like putting your name upside down, kind of.
Well, again, I love this show and tell quality to all of this.
Oh, this is great.
The cover was designed by, oh dear, the cover was designed by, where did it go? Oh, here. By one of my best friends, Jason Fulford. This is one of his books. He's a photographer, and all his books have, you know, this is a box with 3 books, so you can see the cover, right? Why it has this kind of game-like quality to it. What is up? What is down? And so, and you know, comes with these little things, and so Jason is really, really fabulous. I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I just felt like talking about Jason's work. and his photographs are really, really beautiful. And he also happens to be married to a wonderful writer and illustrator called Tamara Shopson. And so yes, I was lucky enough to have Jason on board, and he designed a beautiful cover. And I think you're totally right. I think the book owes a great deal to that cover.
Did you have a lot of say in the design? Did they give you?
I did. I was, in fact, I brought Jason in.
Okay.
He doesn't work for Coffee House. I think they have designers there that either, I don't know if they're on staff or it's people they usually work with. And there were Chris and everyone. They were very generous. I know, and I've learned now that book covers are a complicated matter. Lots of fights break out over them. Things never end well. I was lucky, and they were also very patient and generous. So yeah, I was very much involved in the cover, but the credit is all Jason's.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference just working and like in a bookstore. As much as we always want like the work to stand up to scrutiny, it's
Yeah.
always the cover that catches people's eyes.
I just remembered, I'm looking up, I'm not going to get up again, but you remember the first edition of Cosmopolis, the Don DeLillo with the limo. It's a white limo. That's also Jason, and he did all the reissues of Richard Ford with the photographs. And so it's not a lucky sort of one-off for him. He's been doing this for many years, and he's really talented.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of book designers don't get the credit they deserve.
I agree. I happen to really love design and be invested in it, and I don't know. I'm friends with Peter Mendelsohn, who's a great book designer,
Right.
and written beautifully about. He has a book called Cover. He has another book called What We See When We Read, which I love. And he just came out with a novel last year called The Same Same. I was lucky enough to blurb that book. And it's a sort of a very weird take on The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. And many other things. It's not just reduced to that. So yeah, I feel I'm in conversation with designers. My wife is a design, but for film. So the whole visual discussion is there all the time here at home and with my friends, and I feel it makes its way into my writing as well. Not only because of sort of the images that I try to conjure up in writing, but I also try to pay attention to how the writing looks on the page. Sort of a visual balance is very important to me, aside from obviously the semantic dimension.
Yeah, because your book always struck me as very cinematic. Just in like, not so much in like I could see a movie being made out of it, but also at the same time, it's like so much of it is the landscape and the world, and like you can almost like there's almost like a sense of like a cinematography to it to me.
No, that's I can only agree, and it was it was conceived that way very much.
And were you in the book is kind of for people who haven't read it, it has a bit of like a Western setting, or a revisionist Western.
Sure.
Were there films that influenced you with that, or was that?
I watched, I feel I watched the whole canon with some gaps here and there, but it was a very sort of robust diet of westerns. It did and it didn't. I try to sort of be acquainted with the stuff and then kind of force myself to forget it in a way. Um, I think what influenced me the most was two things about the films is how sort of inaccuracies are so built into the movies. Everything takes place inevitably, in Death Valley or something. It doesn't matter where you are, suddenly you're there. And so I was interested in that, and I was also interested in how heavily they rely on cliches and commonplaces and highly fossilized tropes.
Well, is that something, so I guess I'm like harping on this because I was watching Once Upon a Time in the West last night.
Oh, Sergio Leone?
Yeah, so like the first half. Is that something you found more in American Westerns or the Italian?
I honestly find that it's part of the genre. I mean, the remember that the Italian ones are shot mostly in Almeria in Spain. They're not even shot in the United States. So, I love that this regard for contextual accuracy. I think that's wonderful. I embrace it and I love it. And that's something I learned from that. There's also, and I'm a little hesitant to go into it because I'm not a film scholar, but as much as noir helped create really a visual vocabulary for detective fiction, right? And I don't know when that happens. It's probably, surely with Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett mostly, when it's uncertain to me whether film is imitating literature or literature is now being written with the film in mind, or with that sort of visual lexicon in mind. But to me, that never quite happened with the Western, and the cinematic language of the Western is really, really powerful. The juxtaposition between vast vistas and the intimacy of the characters, uh, cinematography in general is beautiful. The very experience of speed and movement in film, which if you look at Stagecoach on, that the way in which we experience velocity is so important, and I think that's something that film learned to do with the Western, but that somehow that didn't make its way back into literature the way it did with like noir and hard-boiled crime fiction. I don't fully see that back and forth in the Western as a genre. But again, I could be totally mistaken, and I don't know if any of this makes sense.
Were you reading Westerns, or was it just
Oh, I was reading everything. I have friends who say, I don't read fiction, for instance, while I'm writing fiction, and I totally get it. But I'm just the opposite. I read everything that I can lay my hands on that pertains to the project. So yeah, I read a bunch of westerns. Sort of, I'm not that interested in the proper westerns like Owen Wister and Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey, and I've read them, but I don't like them. Obviously, I find the stuff that comes a little later, like in the 50s and so on, much more engaging, especially John Williams, Oakley Hall, and Charles Portis, who sadly died just a few weeks ago. And yeah, that stuff I genuinely like. The other stuff, not so much. It was just I was studying. Yeah.
And the book itself, so here's how I've always felt about the book, and I've never like really discussed this with you before. Can you hear that fridge in the background? Is that
It's a very soothing hum. You shouldn't
okay?
worry about it.
Good. I was wondering if I should get up and turn it off, but we're just gonna go with it.
Okay.
So the book to me always felt like a very good portrait, and I'm saying this as somebody who's
A what portrait?
I'm very introverted,
Oh,
and so the book always felt like how it feels to me to be introverted,
yes.
because it's about this character who can't quite connect with people for obvious reasons, like there's a language barrier and like
Yeah.
very vast cultural differences. But so much of it is just kind of in his head. And you, from what I don't know you very well, but you seem like an extrovert. And I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering where that sort of sense of isolation in the book came from. Or if you ever looked at it as like the portrait of somebody who's introverted.
Oh, 100%. Yes. No doubt about that. I don't, on the other hand, I'm a little hesitant I mean, I don't accept your definition of me as an extrovert, and I'm a little hesitant to apply any sort of binaries like that to myself,
Right.
you know? But yeah, I mean, I'm also hesitant to talk too much about myself and my personal circumstances, but um, I think the book reflects a very lonely a very lonely period in my life. That is a reality. But it was also, as you said, it was a very intentional exploration of, you know, what happens to someone once we sever all their ties to others and take away from them all those attributes and qualities that we normally associate with the category of human, like, you know, language, a certain perception of time, institutions, um, uh, um, you know, contact with fellow human beings and so forth. What do you have left, you know, aside from a human shaped body? Is it still, is this sort of mute, non-speaking, memoryless creature who's also unable to imagine a future for itself? Is this still a human? Does it make us reconsider what being a human means? I mean, this all sounds very, very pompous, but and academic, but they truly were some of the questions that were driving the book. Sorry, now I wish we could go back and do all of this because it's a little.
No, that's
too
a
much.
great answer, because I think it is kind of like the book really, like, I really connected with it on that level. Like I was very entertained with it and very like emotionally attached to the book, but also just kind of like that sense of like understanding how you fit in a world where you don't quite connect with people.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's more elegantly put.
And then, so obviously there's others might be feeling that right now, since everyone's kind of
yeah,
in isolation, or should be in some way.
right. Here is something again to refute your view of me as an extrovert. Um, I did a PhD before really fully committing to literature. I always wrote, but you know, I was a full-time academic for a while, and my dissertation was on different forms of confinement and solitude in modern literature. So it's something I've been thinking about for a really long time. I never thought that dissertation, which needs absolutely to be forgotten, would would ever have like a vague semblance of, relevancy, and here we are. Um, um, but confinement has been something I've been thinking about in different ways, and in different mediums. I would say, because scholarly writing is almost like a whole different medium, a whole different
Right.
language, than literary writing. So it's something that's been on my mind for a long time, and I think I do believe people write like about two or three things, and that's it, over and over again. And sometimes those two, three things are more obvious, and other times they're ciphered and not so clear. But that is one of mine for sure, and it always has been, because it's yeah, and it still is. I'm working on this new book, and in a very different way, it has somehow to do with that as well.
Have you been productive through all of this? Have you been able to focus on work like that, or?
Yeah. I force myself to, and I want to. It's not, it's not. It's what I've always rather be doing, is writing. And yeah, I get up very early. I try to get up before my family wakes up. It doesn't always work that way, but try to get up between like 4 and 5, and 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 then my wife very kindly lets me write for a few more hours after uh, our child wakes up, uh, and then after lunch, I mean, by lunchtime it's all over. But I feel I get a few hours in every day, and I'm making progress. That feels good. Yeah.
So we were talking about people reading books about pandemics and disease.
Yeah.
Do you have recommendations if anybody's looking for books on isolation? Do you have like a?
Oh boy, do I? Yeah, I have many recommendations about that. Well, obviously, the first choice would be Robinson Crusoe, which is a novel that I really like, although it's kind of a messy novel and ideologically super objectionable for a very long list of reasons. But it's one of those books that is trying to figure out. It's one of those novels that is trying to figure out what a novel is as it is being written, and that is something that is always very appealing to me. Um, and of course, Defoe has written also about plagues and stuff. So I think that would be a good beginning. Um, I think my all-time favorite about confinement and isolation is Against Nature, by Belgian writer Carl Joris Huysmans. Uh,
Oh, okay.
yes, I love this book. It's this decadent French kind of pseudo aristocrat who builds this very baroque house for himself and shuts himself into it, and has mechanical fish and gem encrusted tortoise, and his isolation is such that he even refuses to eat, because he's that shut down. And I won't tell you what happens related to that, because it's very bizarre, and it's a good book. So that's a book I love, about isolation. Let me think. What else? Um, I I really like Adorno, Theodore Adorno, and I think The Aesthetic Theory is a very good book on isolation. I think his whole conception of aesthetics relies on, he compares art often to a monad, sort of this concept he gets from Leibniz, and it's shut within itself, and it is windowless. It's an image he uses very often to refer to the self-contained and utterly autonomous nature of the work of art. And so I think the book is, in a weird way, about confinement, radical confinement and isolation. And the prose is, I love the prose, but it's so claustrophobic. You feel it physically, and it's been a huge, massive influence for me, Adorno. I think Kafka is always sort of a good choice for isolation. By the way, Adorno's aesthetic theory was never finished, as is the case with many of Kafka's novels. And I should also say that Adorno planned to dedicate his aesthetic theory to Samuel Beckett, who, again, is one of the, I think, masters of isolation and solitude. And, you know, the monologue is the form of, is the genre of isolation. And I love Beckett. He's one of those authors who has really changed my mind and my life when I meant to say, really, when I first read him, it was a big turn. I could also mention Borges. He has, who is a big favorite of mine, and he has many stories that take place in isolation. Most famously, I think this librarian in Babel who's locked into this library, this infinite, endless library, and roams around it for his entire life. But he has many stories about, let's call them philosophical prisoners, because they're physically confined to cells or to their own bodies or to their own bed, but their minds, never stop going. I'm running through a list of stories by Borges. There's a nice little essay to be written there about confinement. There are just so many. Sadly, I'm not a big fan of the translation. The big Penguin book with the collected fiction. But, it's still Borges. And as he would have said himself, a classic can withstand any form of mishandling. So he's okay. And I still recommend that book.
And maybe there's time for people to learn Spanish. And
That's right. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I think we might be running out of time.
Okay, that's cool. This is so much fun.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being my test subject, I think.
I hope it goes well, and, go Malaprops. I hope I get to visit you in person soon enough, and thank you for your good work.
Yes, well, thank you, and thank you for joining us and taking time, and we appreciate it. So
thanks, Justin. See you soon.
All right, see ya.
Be well.